This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Gentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 258 of the GardenDC podcast. Bulbs are low maintenance and are generally low cost. They're a great way to fill your garden with color and beauty. In this episode of GardenDC, we talk with author Jenny Rose Carey all about the latest trends in gardening with bulbs. The plant profile is on Spiderwort, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the art and science of pickling by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by author Jenny Rose Carey. She's going to be talking to us all about her new book, The Essential Guide to Bulbs, Grow a Bounty of Beautiful Bulbs in Gardens and Containers. Welcome back to the show, Jenny.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
So I looked up your past episodes with us. So we had you on episode 18. Can you believe that? Talking all about shade gardening, which was a wonderful episode. And then we had you on episode 111 on flower combinations. And that was from your book on the Ultimate Flower Gardener's Guide. And so what have you been up to in these past few years?
Well, I have a new book. What a surprise. So, as you announced, it has a nice long title, but it's basically all about flower bulbs, not light bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been around the world taking photos because I take my own photos and, immersing myself in all of the bulbs and growing them all and writing about them and having a lot of fun in the process.
Mm-hmm. And so I was just up to visit you in your garden in Ambler, PA, and that was for an unrelated event. We can probably talk about that in a little bit, having to do with Gertrude Jekyll.
Yep.
But I did notice some of the bulbs, summer bulbs in the garden there. So your book talks about not just the spring flowering ones, correct?
Correct. It goes all the way through the year because I just love the seasonality of them. And I have a bulb out in my garden, at least one or two, pretty much every day of the year. So it's a good thing.
And listeners, if you ever get a chance to visit Jenny Rose Carey's garden, maybe on a garden conservancy tour, maybe another tour, take advantage. It's not a small garden. It's not Longwood Gardens. Like, it's not
No,
that huge, right?
no, it is
But
not.
it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a private garden. So it's very personal. And that means I can grow what I like. And I do like bulbs. So there's a lot of them.
Great. So we're going to talk about some hot trends in bulbs. And I wanted to know first, this is going to be your toughest question probably of the
Ooh.
interview, Jenny Rose, and that is having to choose a favorite. So it doesn't have to be one, but maybe your most favorite bulbs.
Ooh, okay. Well, the one that gets me through the winter is always the snowdrop, or galanthus is its Latin name. And that is because I will have not a tremendous show, but in the winter, one little bulb makes me happy. So starting around Thanksgiving, I have my first few of the snowdrops, and then different ones pop up all the way through to, I would think, March, maybe even the beginning of April. So there are different species and they're only tiny. They're not going to knock your socks off like a dinner plate dahlia does, but to me, each one of them is very special. So that gets me through the winter. And then couldn't really do without daffodils because they are so diverse, and people don't realize that you can have them in bloom from late February through to even the beginning of May, and all different types, shapes, sizes. And then after that, in the summer bulbs, I think probably dahlias or dahlias are my favorite because I grow them for cutting, and I really appreciate, again, the diversity and the pretty colors, lots of different shapes.
Yeah, and dahlia does bring up the pronunciation. I prefer dahlia myself. And then also, they're more of a tuber. So let's
Yes.
go back and
Yes.
define, since this is the essential guide to bulbs, what
Yes.
are we talking about in plants?
So when I wrote the book, I write for gardeners, and really the way that I write, because it's from personal experience, plus I am a science teacher, I'm really writing that you could pick it up and read it right from the beginning. So when I call things a bulb, I mean anything that stores its energy underground. And I do define what the different types of ways of storing things are, but I don't belabor the point, because for a gardener, you bung it in the ground, and as long as it's going to, get its energy when the leaves come up and then recharge, hopefully for next year, it doesn't really matter what it's called. But there are true bulbs, and that's more like an onion. And those are some of our favorite ones, like a daffodil and a tulip and an allium, those sort of ones. And then there are things called corms, Corms. They are more like a crocus, they're a gladiolus, and they are smaller, and they don't have, like when you cut an onion, it has the layers of the leaves. But a corm, if you wanted to cut your poor crocus bulb in half, you wouldn't see that. It's solid throughout. And then there are tubers of various sorts, like if you grow a begonia, some of the begonias come from this sort of flat disc-like thing, like a cyclamen. And then my dahlias, my beloved dahlias, are a tuberous root, and then things like a bearded iris is a rhizome. But as I said, this is all in the book on pages 30 and 31, but read it and then maybe forget it and just think, oh, they're a brown blobby thing and I just have to plant it the right way. I don't think you have to know it, but I think it's interesting if you're an inquisitive sort of person.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to see what's in a bulb catalog or in the bulb section of a garden center, because again, you're going to have anything from gladiola and dahlias to your classic daffodils and tulips. But then there are some like outlier ones that you're like,
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
consider this a bulb? It's kind of on the edge.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
again, that storage underground unit, we'll call it,
Yeah.
that's going to be your definition there.
Yes. And that's how I've used it throughout. So bulb is my general term for all of them, because otherwise you've got to say every time you write it, bulbs, tubers, tuberous roots, rhizomes, blah, 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 and it just makes the book unwieldy. So we just call them bulbs.
I think that's how most of us gardeners just lump them together too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And occasionally you might hear somebody say, that's a corm. And you're
Yeah.
like, really?
Yes. I know. Well, I'm nothing if not, wait for the pun, down to earth. There we go. Sorry.
So you described bunging it into the ground, which is not a term that I use, but let's talk about how we bung it or put that root into the ground, or
Yeah.
corm or bulb or division if it's a rhizome. Maybe some planting tips, because
Okay.
right now we're coming up on the season. If you're listening to the podcast shortly after it's come out, we are in the beginning of fall and looking towards spring flowering bulbs, and a lot of us are purchasing and planting those in the next few weeks.
Yes. The first question I get asked a lot about this is actually, when should I plant my spring flowering bulbs? And I usually say it's sort of after the ground has begun to get chilly, the nights have got more cool, and the leaves on the trees are turning colour. And that usually gives you a good indication of when it's time to start some of maybe the smaller bulbs that might dry out a bit more. And then I would plant the daffodils, and then the last ones to go in, if you've got, if you order quite a few. Tulips don't need to go in until, really, as long as you can dig the ground, they can go in last. And then planting methods, in the book I give you very, very easy things, but you're basically got to get them into the ground deep enough that they can make good roots, but not too deep that the little shoot can't make it up to the top above the ground. So you usually look at the height of the bulb and go, I would say, 2.5, 3 times is what at a minimum. But for the larger tulips, I like to put them down 8 inches, sometimes 10 inches, and then fewer varmints get to dig them up as well. Of course, pointy end up. And if you can't work out which you think is the top and the bottom, just lay them sideways in the hole and they will figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And that's good advice. And I admire the fact that you go down 8 to 10 inches with some of the bulbs, and that gets them out of the critter zone. That's a great tip. But I'm going to confess, Jenny Rose, to some cheating.
Okay.
So what I will do sometimes is, especially if it's heavy clay soil and I'm just like, I can't get the shovel into here this much, I'll just kind of like wiggle the shovel back and forth
Yes. Yeah.
and just kind of push the bulb down along the shovel's blade. If you can
Yes.
picture that,
Yeah.
as much as I can get it into the soil, and
Yeah.
that might even be 2 inches down. And then here's my cheating part: I throw compost or something on top, and I'm like,
Yes.
that counts as an inch, right?
Yes.
That counts
Yeah.
as, as some insulation.
Yeah.
But I think
That's
I'm
a
getting
good
away
way.
with that because of our milder winters, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that I didn't realize people didn't know, and some of your listeners probably this already, but with your big shovel, you can actually make a nice wide hole
Mm-hmm.
and then just put 3 or 5 or however many are in the packet tulips into that hole.
Yep.
So you don't have to make one hole per bulb, because somebody was saying to me about, oh, I've got, 20 bulbs, I've got to dig 20 holes. I'm like, no, how about two? But then with your big shovel, you can put them in. And also, while you're making that hole, you don't have to make it very wide, because on the packet, for example, a lot of tulips say plant them 8 inches apart. I'm like, no, not 8 inches apart, because then it'll look sparse when they come up.
Mm-hmm.
So I treat each planting hole more like a container and put them in tightly, especially with tulips. You don't know how long a life they're going to have. So if you put them in closer and they do well, you can always dig them up and then spread them apart, make new clumps later.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll do like a trench, like a long
Yes.
line,
Yeah.
and it might be, 6 inches wide, but several bulbs long. And then
Yeah.
the same thing, a grouping, like 2 shovels wide, I guess you would call it. And
Yeah.
that would might be 10 tulips, a dozen daffodils, whatever your choice is in that. Yeah,
Or
that's a lot less work.
both.
Yep,
I love
both,
doing them
both.
both. And that's another thing that I didn't realize people did, because we talk a lot about containers and putting, like tulips and daffodils in the container. But once you've dug that hole, why not put different types in that same hole? Because it gives you a longer season of bloom. You've dug the hole, you've done the work, and then put some of the little short bulbs, fill in a bit. Say you did tulips on the bottom of the hole, and then fill in a bit, and then put some daffodils sort of in between where you've had the tulips below, but it doesn't really matter. And then put
Hmm.
another bit of soil back in, and then put some grape hyacinths or some crocus or all the different things in together. And I happen to love that mixed look. If you want just one type, fine, but we're going more and more to sort of a naturalistic sort of look. And I think those mixed ones, you get a longer season of bloom, and it's, I think it's a good look.
And as you say, Jenny Rose, less work in the end because
Yes,
one
exactly so.
good sized hole, amend that, put that in, and then layer those bulbs in there, and then you have a nice grouping. And then in future years, you can dig it, separate things, pop them out, put them somewhere else. And do you amend with anything? I know Brent Heath of Brent and Becky Bulbs
Yeah.
recommends azomite. What do you use, or if anything, with your bulbs?
More of a lazy gardener. I love Brent. I think azomite would be good, but also I plant a lot of bulbs. So, I'm more likely, if I use anything, I think a lot depends on your soil type, Kathy. So if you are gardening in, like down at the shore, you probably have silty or sandy soil, or if
Hmm.
it's along a riverbank or something. If you have silty or sandy soil, I don't find that you need to amend it, because that's more like the Dutch bulb fields are. And so the water drains, because what kills a lot of bulbs is that they rot. It's like having a wet vegetable drawer and having
Hmm.
your onions rot. So, if it's good, well-drained soil, I don't think you need to add very much. But in my clay soil, I do get what's called chicken grit. It might come under the brand grit, and it's like a fine granite that is used by chicken raisers, and they would normally eat it along with their feed or something. But I use it in the bottom of the hole, so that the bottom of the bulb, the plate at the bottom of the bulb where the roots come out, is well drained, even if the surrounding soil isn't so well drained. So grit is my preferred amendment. And then if it's a long-term planting that will live in the ground and you hope will perennialize and come back year after year, then I do use some bone meal, which is the old-fashioned fertilizer that is low in nitrogen. You don't want a high nitrogen for the flowering bulbs, because nitrogen makes leaves and not flowers. So that would be, and then the good old leaf mold is also, so I'm likely to have either a wheelbarrow or a tub trug or something, and then I sort of mix up some leaf mold, some grit, take the soil out of the hole, put it in the wheelbarrow, mix it up with things, and then use that to backfill the hole, and probably top dress, like you were saying, top dress with compost. Compost, leaf mold, you know, any of the things that add a bit more organic matter,
Yeah.
unless it's a dry loving bulb, in which case I do top dress the soil with gravel. And many of the the smaller bulbs that you might grow in a raised rocky bed do much better if you top dress with river gravel or something like that. You can get bags of that.
And I was going to say the bone meal gives you a little bit of a bonus benefit in keeping the critters out or away from your just planted bulbs, because I find that's when the squirrels come and kick your bulbs out of the
Yes,
ground, is
yes,
right after you planted, because you have a freshly planted hole for them, and they're not necessarily eating the bulbs,
they're just,
especially if it's a poison bulb like daffodil,
yeah.
but they're putting their acorns or their little finds in your freshly dug holes.
They are, and I think there must be some smell of newly turned earth. I think they've done research on that, but certainly, everyone realizes that smell of earth after rain. But it's sort of like I swear that they know that you've just been digging, and then they come right away and make a mess. But then you have to
Oh,
just replant them.
yeah, they're not just smelling it, I think they're watching you in the tree, Jenny Rose, and they're plotting, and they're like, "Mm, I see her go back into the garden shed, it's my turn now," for sure. So, that brings us to critters, and one of our hot trends is deer-resistant bulbs.
Yes. And the top one, and I highly recommend everyone, if you haven't tried daffodils, they are easy. They are, like nothing eats them. And if you get ones that are right for your zone, so your hardiness zone from the USDA, if you buy ones that are hardy in your zone, plant them, plenty deep enough, give them some bone meal, they should come back year after year. So those are, that gives me good value for money, and nothing eats them. Alliums, in sometimes I've heard people say that they eat them, that these are the flowering onions that bloom after the daffodils, but I haven't had any trouble with anybody eating those in my
Mm-mm.
garden. And later in the year, I find you do have to protect most of the summer blooming ones, because there are things that will nip the tops off the dahlias, they'll nip a canna, so I find later in the year there are fewer that are what you might really call resistant to
Mhm.
being eaten. But I use a lot of chicken wire cages to get them going, and I do have some fenced in areas, and that's really, it's the 3 foot fence, but it's the same as if you were growing vegetables for most of the summer bulbs, because they are very tasty. Not that I've eaten any of them, but
Yeah, I heard that tulips, we can eat the tulip bulbs. If we can eat it, then the critters can definitely eat it. I would add to the deer-resistant bulbs Dutch hyacinths. So anything with a strong fragrance, fritillaria, for sure.
yes, but only, yes, the Fritillaria imperialis, the crown fritillary,
Hmm.
smells like a skunk. So when you plant that and you get the bulb, the first time I ordered one, because I'd only seen them in gardens, but I hadn't ever planted one. This was years ago. And I opened the packet and I'm like, somebody sent me a skunk. And it's like, no, I don't want it. And it was when I probably was fairly new from England. I had never seen or really knew about the skunk apart from, what is it, in Bambi you see the skunk.
Flower.
And that was, yeah, that was my only, like cultural reference to a skunk. But anyway, it really does smell. But I use that to my advantage. And if I'm planting up like I have these big containers that I don't move, and I like to have tulips in there, and I will put one of these crown fritillaries which grow 2.5 foot to 3 foot tall, and they're like nothing else. Look it up, they are just crazy. They look like a top knot of leaves on the top and then dangling down bells that are in orange or yellow and occasionally a bit red. But they, because of the smell, they do seem to keep the animals away from your tulips or whatever you've planted. And I do tend to disguise some of my more edible ones by planting the smellier bulbs around them. So, like I will interplant daffodils and tulips or allium and tulips or something, or hyacinths and tulips. So, it's worth a try.
Yep, that helps. And as you mentioned earlier, doing a wardrobe, as I call it, of bulbs of the early blooming, mid and late spring
Yeah,
ones. You
yeah,
can do that with your tulips. You can do that with your daffodils. There's some other bulbs where you have a nice long season of bloom. But then you get that one day in spring, right, Jenny Rose, where
yeah.
it's super warm and everything blasts into bloom. And then
I
you're like,
know, and
yeah.
we just live for that all year long. I was thinking of making a T-shirt that said something like "Let every day be that first day of spring" or something. Because it's just like, just thinking about it makes me happy, and it's just like the smell and the green leaves coming out and the earth smell and everything. Yep. Yep, it's
Mhm.
worth getting out, in a few weeks' time and planting some things, because then you'll have that in your own garden or containers.
And you were talking about timing. So my thing is try to get them all in between kind of Halloween and Thanksgiving. That's usually my
Yeah,
goal, is between those two holiday markers. And then if I don't, hopefully by Christmas, right?
yeah,
Or the new year. And if you really don't, hopefully by January 15th, like at
yeah,
least try for by the Epiphany.
yeah. Yes, that's right. But basically, I get panic calls like over the holidays saying, forgot to plant my bulbs. If you can get a shovel in the ground, get them in.
Hmm.
They're not going to look good sitting in a bag in your garage, so you might as well try. And often, even if the rest of your ground is frozen, a little bit on the south side of your house might be not frozen. And
Hmm.
if all else fails, then you get a container, a pot, like a terracotta pot, plastic pot, and plant them in that. And then in the spring, even if they don't do very much, you can just take all those bulbs out of that pot and sink them into your flower bed.
Hmm. Good, great tip. And I was going to say that before you plant out your bulbs, if you're buying them early or if your mail order bulbs are arriving early, where do you recommend storing them, Jenny Rose? Because I hear
Yeah,
so many sad tales from readers of Washington Gardener and listeners of this podcast saying, I forgot about my bulbs. They
yeah.
were sitting in my entryway in the house.
Oh,
And I'm like, if you can, throw them in your vegetable
yeah.
crisper drawer or in a cool garage or basement.
Yeah, but not in with fruit. You don't want them in with fruit.
No.
So if you store fruit in your fridge, then you don't want it. And also, you don't want other people thinking there's something to eat if you have a big family. I mean, cool is good, but front entry hall is a good place, or back entry hall, wherever you're going to trip over them,
Hmm.
or label a box plant me or something like that, but it's happens to the best of us, guilty here. So don't worry about it and just, plant them whenever you can get to it, but try and remember next year. Give yourself a reminder on your phone calendar or something like that. Plant the bulbs on a nice weekend day or something like that.
Hmm. Or enlist your Thanksgiving weekend guests to do
Oh,
so.
yes.
So that's one of the hot trends I was reading about, Jenny Rose, in bulbs is a bulb planting party in the fall.
Oh,
And
lovely.
and like inviting and having kids join you because it's a fairly easy task to do as a group or like say a municipal or public planting. So I do
Yeah.
it locally with my Silver Spring Garden Club. On Veterans Day, we plant daffodils in a local park, and that's always
Oh,
a fun
lovely.
group activity. So
And
yeah.
then there's skill levels for anyone. I mean, people that are strong enough to dig, they can do the digging. And then even little ones can pop the bulbs in the hole and learn to put them pointy end up.
Hmm.
I would say if you're doing hyacinths and some of the other bulbs, you do need to make sure people wash their hands afterwards or supply them with some gloves or something like that, because they have a little bit of you can get a reaction to some of the skin on a hyacinth bulb.
Same thing with daffodils too. You can have an
Yeah.
allergic reaction to
Yeah. So,
the skin on the bulb.
give people gloves or tell them to bring gloves and then just wash their hands or whatever afterwards. Um, Monitor children and make sure they're not putting anything in their mouths and things. But, it's very easy. And I think that people who aren't gardeners, you're giving them a gift of learning how to do it, because many people are tentative about planting bulbs because it's not instant gratification. You've got to put them in and then wait. And then people are like, well, where are they? And so I think once you've shown them how to do it, they're more likely to do it at their own houses as well. So
Hmm.
that's a good thing.
That's so true, Jenny Rose, because for years bulbs were considered kind of out because of that not instant gratification unless
Yeah,
you bought
yeah,
forced bulbs in the spring. So you can go to any grocery store, right, or garden center, and they'll
yes,
have
yeah,
forced bulbs for you, and then you can plant them in the ground and pretend that you planted the bulbs
yeah,
last fall. Or for a lot less money, just
yeah,
buy a bag of a dozen bulbs and do
yeah.
that in the fall, and you get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, and while you're thinking about planting them, I always try and get some by the back door, because that's where you're going to see them. I mean, some people plant them, like down the end of the garden or in their veg beds or something, but they're not necessarily going to that area in the early spring. And some of them, come up so early, like the rock garden iris, come
Hmm.
up really March time. So you want them to be nearby so you will see them and appreciate them.
Like along pathways where you're going to be coming back
Yeah,
and forth. That's an
yeah,
entranceways, as you say. And
yeah,
your book subtitle mentions containers. And I
yes,
know a lot of people who have attempted bulbs in containers and have not had much success because of our winter wet. And they kind of
yes,
just rot in those containers. So what are your
yes.
tips for getting successfully done bulbs in containers?
Well, the first thing is I do use my magic bulb mix with more grit or gravel or whatever you have that's sort of rocky. So the first thing is choose a container that you can leave outside, or if you have a space like a window well or something that you could put them in, then you get a little bit more protection. Choose frost proof, not frost resistant containers, because another thing that happens is they can crack over winter if we get a nasty winter, and as you say, it's a bit warmer, but who knows, it's changing. So choose your container. Then you are going to make sure it's deep enough when you choose it, that there is enough room for root growth, because you're basically trying to give those planted bulbs in containers about 10 to 12 weeks of cold to grow roots before they will then do the shoots. And so you put, I mean, the jury is out on whether you put little stones or crocks in the bottom. I always put over the hole, make sure it has a hole in it, then it won't rot so much. Make sure that there is good drainage coming through.
Hmm.
You put the rocks or whatever in the bottom, partly also to give it a bit of weight at the bottom. So if you get a wind in when the bulbs are growing, it won't blow over. And that's why I don't really like plastic so much, because plastic really can make bulbs too wet, because it doesn't breathe like a terracotta. So if you can find a good terracotta, or if you can protect it, then you put at least, depending how deep your container is, an inch or two of a mixture, which is well drained potting soil, and or you could put leaf mold in, you could put regular soil in, I know everyone says it has to be potting soil, it has to be sterile. I don't find that with bulbs. I find that they like a bit of my clay soil mixed in my magic bulb mix, and then the grit and gravel. So if I were doing an ideal mix, I would do 1/3 gravel or grit, the chicken grit from the feed store or Agway or Tractor Supply, and 1/3 like potting mix that you might buy. And I try and do peat free because it comes from peat bogs in Canada and I don't want to strip those peat bogs. Hard to find, but if you can. And then the other third could be some soil or leaf mold. And if you don't have it, just do 2/3 potting soil. And then I mix all that up, and then so it goes in the bottom. Then I nestle the bulbs onto that bottom mix, and I then might do another layer of the magic bulb mix of soil, and then probably put another layer, because with a container you want it to look full. And if it's a really deep one, you might get another layer of maybe some small bulbs. But in my experience, I found that the containers that are one type of bulb are easier to manage because you know that they need the same conditions, all those bulbs in that. And then we make these things called vignettes, little pictures using the different bulb containers, and we mix some, some pansies in another pot and some, little English daisies or something. But the key when you store it is try and put it under an overhang. If you have an overhang for your roof, it does need to be cold for that 10 to 12 weeks. But even like if you have a cold garage, that might be good. So it needs to be cold, but not like, as you say, super wet. So if it's out in the garden, sometimes when we get that freeze thaw, the pot can crack or they get super saturated. But the gravel and the grit in it helps it drain. The other thing is pop it up on top of a tile or some bricks or what we call pot feet, which are decorative things or just whatever you have lying around, little bits of tile or stone, because then the drainage hole stays open. If it's sitting on concrete or a slab, then it can freeze directly to that, and that might help the pot crack more easily. And also that hole doesn't stay open and the water can't drain out. So drainage, and 10 to 12 weeks of cold. And then you can start, if you want to force them for the house, you can bring them in, or if you're, like just letting them be outside, you can move them to another place by March, where you can put them wherever you like, and if they're heavy, unfortunately, if you've got a big, heavy, like a half wine barrel, then you really need to pot it up in place. Otherwise, you are not lifting that without a dolly or some very strong people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I have good luck, as you say, of pushing it up against the house, a brick wall, under the eaves. So you're getting some protection from the winter wet, but also still that cold exposure, which is key to have that bulb life cycle. And then if you're forcing indoors, you want to have that same length of cold exposure. Like it could be a dedicated refrigerator space. Again, not near fruit.
Yeah, not near fruit. Yep.
And then that way.
And there is one other option if you are listening in, warmer climates where you don't get 10 to 12 weeks of cold. There are, like Brent and Becky's do have what they call pre-chilled bulbs that you can buy, or you can pre-chill them yourself like tulips in a refrigerator, as you say, but not really with food. So, but you want to give them that cold because that sort of sets the flower buds in motion. So all of the information to make the flower bulb is there in miniature in the middle of the bulb, but you have to give it that cold to say, this is winter, even if it's tricking it in a fridge.
Yeah, I always laugh about the term forcing.
Yeah.
It's more tricking is a better term for that. GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jensen Terry Spate, You'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Our next hot trend is native bulbs. And so, since we're in the mid Atlantic US, I don't think there are a ton of native bulb choices, but which ones do you use, Jenny Rose?
I use, I mean, it's not really native to our area, but Camassia is very, very much in the favorite thing now with all of garden designers all over the
Mhm.
place, because it just has that, it feels that in between time after the daffodils and tulips and before we sort of get into the summer bulbs.
Mhm.
So, that one, you go to England and they are everywhere in their meadows. You go to Great Dixter or something like that, and they're just very, very popular. But they do grow well here. There's a garden near here called Chanticleer that, if you haven't ever been to, do go. But they have this whole ribbon of Camassias along by their creek, and it's absolute. I think I've got a picture in the book, but it's just lovely.
Mm.
Liatris is another one. That's a summer bulb that is, goodness, I can't think of its English name, but it's
Mhm.
Liatris. And it's upright, it's purple, the butterflies love it. So there's another hot trend, is bulbs for pollinators. And crinum, if you live in the south of us, would be a native Crinum americanum. And I mean, the other South American ones would be like tuberoses. They come from, the South American part, and then there's other South American ones. But we don't have allium. Let me think. Allium canadense is one. It's not very easy to find, but I think it's going to get more popular as people are thinking about natives. And that is, you can get it from seed from Prairie Moon.
Hmm.
So it's the, canadense allium.
Yep.
But, there's not a huge flora in bulbous things unless you go into our woodland natives. And I have one double page spread on that. And really, when you think about it, many of our spring ephemerals, like the Virginia bluebells, like bloodroot, all technically grow from an underground storage thing that could be called a bulb, but we just don't tend to buy them that way, and we don't tend to think of them that way. But if you think, all of those little spring woodland wonders come up, they have to get their energy before the leaves are on the trees, and then they send it back down to their storage roots. So, you could embrace that if you're
Mhm.
thinking about bulbous plants.
Yeah, I was thinking, by the way, Liatris, blazing star, common
Oh,
name.
yes. Yeah,
People
blazing
would know it
star.
as that. And I was thinking, yeah, all our spring ephemerals, basically from Spring Beauty on, basically are acting like a bulb. So the foliage might come up a little bit, and then it flowers, then the flower dies back, the foliage dies back, and then it brings back next year. And Camassia, I would say a little warning on it because it does tend to naturalize.
Oh, really?
So I've got like a little patch of it I planted one year, and now it's wherever the edge of the driveway is. Like it just wants
Wow.
to run
Wow.
along that. So likes good drainage like a lot of bulbs, but also is one of the taller things that likes to appear in front of shorter things. So
That is amazing,
yeah.
because when you look in its natural habitat, it grows in floodplain meadows.
Mhm.
But, the thing about all of the ones that grow in cracks are that the seed washes down like off a driveway and then
Correct.
falls down there and then starts to grow. But I would love to have that problem, I have to say.
It's just a little odd looking at first because you're like, what are these tall spikes? And
Oh,
then
well, I think
that's
that's
what they
the
are. Yeah. Which does bring us to another hot trend, and that's pollinator bulbs and
yes.
Camassia, of course. The
Yep,
bees love it.
they do.
What are your other top picks for pollinator bulbs?
Well, to start off the interview, we were talking about how I love bulbs throughout the whole year and have them pretty much all year. I do find that even though some of the snowdrops obviously aren't from here, many of the pollinators love those early flowering things because there's nothing else in our native flora that's out. So if we get a hot day in February, and by hot I mean 55, 60 degrees, to put it in context, but they're all out and all on my snowdrops, on the rock garden iris. Basically, if you look at a flower, a bulb flower, and you can see its reproductive parts, then it will be good and attracting pollinators. So, for example, so you start early in the year with the snowdrops, but daffodils, I always see pollinators on my daffodils. You might see them in tulips. And then later in the year, I mean, Liatris is a top. The blazing star is definitely the butterflies love it, and all the little tiny bees. And don't just think of pollinators as, we think of hummingbirds, butterflies, and the big bumblebees and everything. But if you look closely at a lot of these bulb flowers, you will see tiny, wee little insects that you can hardly see with the naked eye. But if you take a photo and blow it up, you will find them. And then I do try and plant as many single flowers as possible. So like the dahlias, I have some single ones that I grow. There's one that is red and yellow that I particularly like that is called Pooh, like Winnie the Pooh, and it's lovely. And then some of the star-like ones they like. So anything where you can see the anthers, the stigma, the style, and the pollinators will love it.
And I think the early crocus, especially if we can do a
Yes,
crocus lawn of Tommies and that sort of thing, the
yeah,
bees that are just emerging, they seem like, I want to call them desperate, but they're
yeah.
like
I think they are.
ecstatic. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
I think they
something out
are.
there, and I get to visit every one of these because they're all usually a nice little colony of them. And the bees are just like, I have something on this cold day.
Yeah, I think crocus is that's a good example.
And so I was going to ask, and I don't know if this counts as a hot trend, but for those of us who've been gardening for a while, we tend to run out of places to put bulbs because it's so crowded with our daffodils coming back every year and our other groupings. How do we find more spaces to put bulbs?
Well, the one that I've been doing for a long, long time, because Europe, you see it all the time, is planting in lawn
Mm,
and leaving the lawn long for, until after the 4th of July or something like that. And I actually have bits that I've left long until, the end of the season really. But I love, so I get particularly the little short bulbs like the muscari, the grape hyacinths, there's one called Iphion, there's all of the scillas and china doxas and all of those lovely little, like 4 inches tall or
mhm.
something. And
Like
some of the short,
pushkinia.
yes, pushkinia, and some of the short daffodils and snowdrops. Like there's a tiny little daffodil that I love that's called Elka, and it is so cute. You just look it up, Elka. And I get those bulbs and I actually rip all the packets open and then mix them up in a tub and then dig sort of like slant my shovel under a piece of turf as if you were doing a very bad golf swing, flip the turf backwards, dig the hole, and then put all of the bulbs that I've randomly picked out of the thing together in a little grouping. And then this lawn that I'm planting in is not fertilized, it's not strong, it's not weeded in any way, shape, or form. So, rough grass and slightly shaded grass with a deciduous tree is the perfect area because you want the bulbs to be able to compete with the grass.
Hmm.
I just put the flap of turf back, gently stomp it down, and then in the spring, these cute little groupings. So the Dutch term for it is Stinzenplanten. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, or a Stinz, Stinz garden. But we have it in England as well. The Brits love growing things up through their lawn. But
Hmm.
you do have to let the foliage of the bulbs ripen and go down and before you cut the grass.
Yeah.
And then the other one is really putting things in the edge of woodlands, where on the sunny side of a woodland or, a tree, pull it out like 3 feet and make a little grouping there, especially a deciduous tree would be another thing. And then the final one would be in rock gardens are coming back in, and they were a thing of my childhood. And many of the bulbs come from mountains where the soil is very, very well drained. And so by raising a bed up, usually facing south or southeast, southwest, and then adding gravel on top, as we were talking about before, and putting some rocks, there's little nooks in between the rocks that are just lovely for some of the small fritillaria that we were talking about earlier, like the crown imperial, but the small versions, and the rock garden iris, and some of the small miniature daffodils do really well in that setting. They're very, very wee, tiny daffodils, but and the bulb is only like the size of a dime or something. They're very tiny.
I love
So,
those tiny daffodils, especially
yeah,
the ones with very grass-like foliage.
yes,
Those are the ones that I've been putting in recently, again, because of crowding with other bulbs. And then
yes,
every
yeah.
every place I dig that I want to put a bulb, oop, I hit another bulb.
I know. Well, that's good. Your garden must look lovely.
So that's your problem is like, ooh, where could I dig where I'm not
Yeah,
hitting
I
another
know.
bulb? But those little grass strappy type of foliage daffodils, those are so enchanting. And some of them don't even look like daffodils. They just have like an
Yeah,
open cup and no like kind of crown around them. Those are so
I
sweet.
know.
And as you said, the Stinson plantain is a huge trend now. And so some people call it a flower lawn or a bulb lawn. There's just crocus lawns that were popular, I think, in the Victorian
Yeah,
era, coming
they've been
back
around for a
now.
long time.
But naturalizing lawn, I guess is another
Yeah,
way to call it.
yeah,
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit about your book. And so the official release date is October 14th. Is that
yeah.
correct? And I have a preview copy, so I was lucky enough to get my hands on that. And so for any listeners wanting to get a copy, how would they purchase it?
So I'm trying to get people to use their local bookshops, and there's the bookshop.org site I like because the money goes back to the local ones, or any of the big online ones. If you would like a signed copy, you can go to my website, jennyrosecarey.com, or you can come to one of my events. I am coming down to speak at various places, so you can look on my website, and I'm not sure if I have the lectures, or just send me a contact through my website or through my social media, which are Jenny Rose Carey on Instagram, or the name of my garden, Northview Garden, North looking to the North View Garden, or invite me to speak because I'm obviously on the road speaking about my books. So that's the
Yeah.
main ways.
Excellent. So I was talking earlier about visiting you for the Gertrude Jekyll event. So let's talk a tiny bit about what that is.
Okay, so I am obviously British, not that you can tell because I've lived here for 38 years, so I have a very strong Philadelphia accent. But I'm a garden historian and will be teaching a course at Longwood on garden history if it's all online. But I am very passionate about looking at women who have had a influence in horticulture and garden design. And one of my heroines is Gertrude Jekyll, and she lived at this house called Munstead Wood, which is in Guildford in Surrey in the southeast of England. And I'm an unofficial ambassador to raise awareness for Munstead Wood and raise money to help save it so that we can all over the years go and visit it. And she, for those of you who don't know, she wrote many books, at least I think 10 books, and thousands of articles, and designed over 400 gardens, which is amazing because she died in 1932. It's back in the day when women really didn't have opportunities to do work. So she's a personal mentor, but I think for many young people coming up in our industry, especially young women, I think she can be a mentor for them as well. So I'm passing the word, and if you want to know more about that, again, contact me through my website and jennyrosecarey.com, and I'd be happy to fill you in. I have a sort of interest list going about that, so then I will keep you posted. I have a once a month email newsletter that you can sign up for on my website, and I do post about what I'm doing with Munstead. But thanks for asking about that, because it's a very exciting project owned by the National Trust of England and Wales, and it's, you know, saved as long as we can raise enough money to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think preserving Munstead wood is a huge project and super important
Thank you.
for those of us who care about garden history at all,
Yeah,
and for future generations to be able to visit it.
yeah. It sends tingles down your spine because it's so amazing.
Any last advice for listeners on using bulbs in the garden? Maybe a couple design thoughts.
Okay. I think that the first thing is to say, remember they're easy and relatively cheap. And even if you have one flower bed, there's room to pop a few in. And I would pop them in clusters, as we were talking about earlier on. So like, minimum of 3 in a little hole. And then in between things like catmint and salvia that will grow, cover that space later. So even if you have an existing flower bed, think how you can pop some crocus along the front, some, maybe some snowdrops in between, some little grape hyacinths and other things in and amongst the things that you have existing. Or if you have no soil and you just have a balcony or something, they are easy in containers, as long as you remember drainage, drainage, drainage. So if you can provide that, and then you will be able to reuse those pots for some summer bulbs, like cannas and even some gladioli or some shorter dahlias.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenny Rose.
My pleasure.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf, and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn, or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Spiderwort plant profile. Spiderwort, Tratus cantia virginia, is a perennial plant with blue-purple flowers on grass-like stalks. It is native to the eastern United States into Canada. Some rare varieties bloom with pink, white, or red flowers. The flowers open in the morning and close in the afternoon or evening. The bloom period is from spring to early summer. You can cut back the plant after the first flush of flowers are done to get it to rebloom in late summer and early fall. It does well in full sun to part shade in moist but well-draining soils. It is hardy to USDA zones 4 to 9. Spiderwort grows to about 18 inches tall. It attracts pollinators such as the long-tongued bee. Spiderwort is said to be edible, but can cause allergic reactions in pets and humans. It was used in indigenous medicines for insect bites, which is where it gets its common name. Another common name is inkweed, due to the flowers containing a strong pigment that can be used as a dye. They can also stain your skin and clothing. It recedes around a bit and can be dug and moved to a better location easily, if desired. Spiderwort, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the blooms of my various native asters. Over at the community garden plot, we picked our last zucchini of the season. We're up for a Horty Award, and that's for the book Ground Cover Revolution. We've been nominated for the GardenCom 2025 People's Choice Horty Awards. Voting goes until October 15th, and every vote counts. If you can cast your vote for Ground Cover Revolution in the book category, I'd be very grateful. You can go to vote.gardencom, that's gardencom.org, and select the Horty Awards ballot there. Voting is free, and please share that with your friends. The October 2025 issue of Washington Gardener magazine is out and being sent to subscribers. You can find it online as well at washingtongardener.blogspot.com. Featured in this issue are autumn daffodils, tulip types for every garden, cedar waxwings, the versatile lemon verbena, shade garden basics, a pop-up sculpture garden at River Farm, dealing with fall webworm, a summary of the recent Urban Tree Summit, a new patty pan squash introduction, Green Lightning, garden books and reviews, a reader contest, a profile of the new Glenmont Forest Community Garden, how to choose and care for fall mums, and much, much more. Friend of the show and bee expert Sam Droege has informed us that poison ivy has one additional benefit to the ones that we talked about in episode 257, and that's that native bees are big fans of the flowers of poison ivy. So if you can leave the poison ivy up in your tree, go ahead and do so. It will not harm the trees, but the native bees will be happy. In garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we gave a variety of bulb planting tips, including to soak your crocus and tulip bulbs for a minute or so in liquid deer repellent before planting them. This is to stop squirrels and other rodents from eating them right away. In local gardening events, coming up on Saturday, October 11th at 10:30 a.m., I am giving a talk and seed-saving demo at Brookside Gardens entitled Seed Saving, Harvesting and Storing Your Garden's Bounty. I'll teach the art of seed saving in this hands-on class, and you can register for that at activemontgomery.org. The fee for the class is $25. Then on Saturday, October 18th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., the Baltimore African Violets Club is hosting their one-day autumn sale. The club members have been busy growing all summer, so their sale tables will be filled with lovely varieties of African violets and many other gesneriads. This is being held at the Joppa Grand Market in Joppa, Maryland. You can find details at baltimoreafricanvioletclub.org. And then on October 25th and 26th and November 1st and 2nd from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day are the Ginkgo Gold Weekends at the State Arboretum of Virginia in Boyce, Virginia. You can find out details about those Ginkgo Gold Weekends at blandy.virginia.edu. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word with Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with the Art and Science of Pickling by Dawn Nicholas. Pickling is having a moment, and it's no longer confined to grandma's cellar or dusty jars in a pantry. Across America, home gardeners are diving into this tangy tradition with relish, pun intended. From small-scale home kitchens to thriving farm stands, pickling is now a culinary adventure that combines creativity, preservation, and a splash of science. Here are some fun facts about the rise in pickling. Number 1, the pickling popularity boom. According to recent food trends, pickling vegetables are among the top 5 condiments Americans love to enjoy, with pickled cucumbers, carrots, and peppers leading the way. Number 2, regional revival. Artisan pickle shops are popping up in urban and rural areas alike, offering everything from traditional dill pickles to pickled peaches, ramps, and even eggs. And number 3, do-it-yourself pickling kits. Online sales of pickling kits have skyrocketed, suggesting that more people than ever are keen to try their hand at creating their own pickled masterpieces. So here's a quick overview. Pickling is an ancient method of preserving food that involves soaking produce in a brine or vinegar solution. There are several types of pickling, ranging from quick pickles or refrigerator pickles that can be ready in a matter of hours to fermented pickles that take weeks to mature. Here's the breakdown. Quick pickling is ideal for beginners. This method uses vinegar, water, salt, and sugar to create a brine. Popular choices include cucumbers, radishes, and red onions. Fermentation. For the patient pickler, fermentation relies on natural bacteria to preserve food. Classic examples are sauerkraut, kimchi, often made with cabbage and a variety of spices. Lactofermentation. This method is more complex and requires precise temperatures and salt ratios. Think kosher dill pickles or traditional fermented carrots. And then large-scale pickling. This involves creating brines in bulk, often using barrel or vat systems, popular with farm-to-table restaurants and small-scale commercial producers. So what's in the pickling pot? Here are some very popular varieties. Cucumbers, the classic choice, are perfect for crunchy dill pickles or bread and butter varieties. Carrots, often paired with dill and garlic for savory twist or spiced with cinnamon for a sweeter treat. Beets, vibrant and earthy, often pickled with cloves and a hint of sugar. Green beans, known as dilly beans, these make an excellent snack or a Bloody Mary garnish. And cauliflower, a favorite for mixed vegetable pickles, often accompanied by carrots and pearl onions. Now, whether you're a seasoned pickler or just starting to brine your very first cucumber, the world of pickling offers endless possibilities. It's a delicious way to preserve your harvest, explore new flavors, and keep your garden alive long after the growing season ends. This has been Christy Page with foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Gents, with editing assistance from intern Cavett Ireland. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 127, Unusual and Specialty Flower Bulbs with Brent Heath. Episode 111, Flower Combinations with Jenny Rose Carey. Episode 18, Shade Gardening with Jenny Rose Carey. By the way, you can become a listener supporter or subscriber. Find that link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and also with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too.